Hello there, my sleepy fellows. Tonight, I'll take you somewhere very special, a place filled with candlelight and whispered enchantments, quiet laughter and magical dreams, all gently tucked between warm stone walls and floating staircases. There's a story waiting for you, soft as a woolen cloak and shimmering like moonlight on still water, a tale that begins in the heart of a familiar castle beneath a sky that once sparkled with stars, until, one quiet night, they vanished from view. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories like this, ones that unfold slowly and tuck you in with magic and calm, you might like to gently tap the like button, subscribe, and follow along for more sleepy tales from the wizarding world. There's no rush, just a soft reminder that you're always welcome here, night after night. Now, shall we wander into Hogwarts? It was one of those evenings that seemed suspended in a dreamy hush. Outside the towering windows of the castle, dusk had settled like a velvet blanket, brushing the treetops of the forbidden forest and turning the black lake into a mirror of silver. Inside, the great hall glowed softly. Hundreds of floating candles bobbed gently on the air, casting a warm, golden light over long wooden tables. The air smelled faintly of beeswax and warm bread, with a trace of enchanted pine from the nearby evergreen garlands still left from winter. Students chatted in hushed voices, laughter rising now and again like the crackle of firelight. The ceiling above, enchanted to reflect the sky outside, shimmered with the deepening purple of evening, stars beginning to twinkle like tiny sparks. But all was calm, safe, familiar. At the staff table, Professor McGonagall sipped quietly from a delicate teacup, her expression relaxed but thoughtful. Near the Gryffindor table, a small group of friends leaned in toward one another, their words too low to hear, but their faces lit with the warmth of the moment. A few first years, yawning and blinking sleepily, picked at their pudding before resting their heads on their sleeves. There was something especially soothing about nights like these, when magic hummed just beneath the surface, gentle and content. When even the portraits on the walls dozed quietly in their frames, and the ghosts floated slowly, their forms barely glimmering in the candlelight. And yet, above it all, twinkling softly in the illusion of the night sky, the stars began to fade, one by one. No one noticed at first. It was too slow, too subtle, but something old and quiet had begun to stir in the heart of the castle. And so our story begins, not with a bang or a flash, but with a hush, a whisper, a mystery that would drift softly through the corridors of Hogwarts, carried on the warm breath of night. Somewhere near the middle of the Gryffindor table, where the candlelight fell just right and the pudding was always slightly warmer, sat the three friends who had grown so used to the castle's little oddities that even the vanishing stars might have seemed like a trick of the eye. Harry Potter, with his ever messy hair and soft green eyes, sat comfortably with his elbows on the table, tracing idle shapes in the condensation left by his goblet. Though he'd seen more than his fair share of adventure, tonight he was calm, thoughtful, content. The weight of his world, for once, seemed distant, replaced by the simple magic of a cozy evening at Hogwarts. Beside him was Hermione Granger, already several pages deep into a book that glowed faintly under the candlelight. Her fingers gently turned the pages while her other hand cradled a warm teacup. She wasn't reading with urgency, not tonight. Her pace was unhurried, as if the story inside her book was part of the larger hush that had fallen over the evening, and opposite them sat Ron Weasley, stretched out lazily with his hands behind his head, watching the enchanted ceiling overhead. His eyes followed the disappearing stars, though he hadn't yet realized they were vanishing. "Reckon the ceiling's getting dusty," he muttered sleepily, more to himself than anyone else. The trio didn't speak much at first. They didn't need to. After years of friendship, their comfort around each other was like a warm blanket, quiet, steady, always there. Across the hall, Neville Longbottom was quietly examining a tiny potted plant he'd brought to dinner, a soft blue sprig with petals that shimmered like frost. He gently touched one leaf, smiling to himself, as if whispering a secret only the plant could hear. Seamus and Dean were nearby, playing a slow game of wizard chess, their movements subdued, almost drowsy. At the staff table, Professor Flitwick chuckled softly at something Professor Sprout had said, the two of them sitting side by side, like old friends, wrapped in shared stories. Hagrid, from his seat at the far end of the room, occasionally glanced toward the windows, his eyes reflecting the glow of the hall like twin lanterns. Even Peeves, usually a whirlwind of noise, floated silently along the upper rafters, watching the flickering candles with an unusual stillness, as though even he could feel the hush settling into the stones of the castle. But in the center of it all, surrounded by warmth and laughter and comfort, were Harry, Hermione, and Ron. The trio who had walked through fire and shadows, now seated in peace, their world momentarily quiet. And as the last sparkle faded from the ceiling above, none of them could know that tonight's mystery would be different. Not dark, not dangerous, but deep, quiet, ancient. The stars were gone, and something old was ready to be remembered. The hour had grown late in the great hall. Most of the pudding had vanished from its platters. The golden goblets were half full of pumpkin juice or warm milk, and only the soft clinking of spoons remained. The enchanted ceiling above no longer shimmered with stars. It now stretched dark and unlit, like velvet without the sparkle. Most assumed the magic had simply dimmed for the evening, but as the last handful of students lingered in gentle conversation, a quiet hum began to resonate through the stone floor. It wasn't unpleasant, nor loud, just barely perceptible, like a cat purring far away, or wind moving softly behind a wall. Ron, mid-sentence, tilted his head and looked at the ceiling again. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice low. Harry looked up as well, narrowing his eyes at the blank, starlit void. "It's quiet, quieter than usual." Hermione closed her book slowly, listening now. No echoes. She was right. The great hall, always so full of clatter, laughter, echoes of forks and footsteps, sounded muted, almost muffled, like the room had wrapped itself in a blanket and decided not to speak. Professor McGonagall had just stood to leave, her tartan shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. But she paused as well, her expression curious rather than alarmed. She looked up, following the student's gaze to the ceiling. "Odd," she murmured. "The enchantment seems to have paused. I shall look into it." But she didn't move, because just then a single light appeared, not above in the sky, but below, on the long Gryffindor table where Harry and the others sat. It shimmered faintly beside Ron's goblet. No one had placed it there. No candle had been lit, but the glow was unmistakable, soft, silvery, and pulsing gently, like a heartbeat. The light began to drift, like a feather caught in a draft. It hovered off the table, floated upward past the golden plates and folded napkins, and glided quietly through the air. All eyes followed it. It rose slowly toward the ceiling, and as it touched the space where stars had once sparkled, a single point of starlight blinked back into existence. Then another and another in quiet succession. The stars returned, but in a strange spiral formation rather than their usual scattered brilliance. Hermione stood up slowly. That's not the original constellation pattern," she whispered. "That's something else." The students had grown still. Even Peeves, still floating lazily above, seemed mesmerized by the unfolding scene. "Is it part of the enchantment?" Harry asked, but his voice sounded uncertain even to himself. "It doesn't feel like the usual magic," Hermione replied. "It feels older, like it's remembering something." The lights continued their silent dance, forming a swirling circle of stars above the trio. Then, from the center of that glowing spiral, a strand of silver mestis descended, thin, ethereal, and winding gently like a ribbon. It reached toward the floor, passing through the air with no wind to move it, until it hovered just above the flagstone beneath their feet. There was no fusser, no rush, only wonder. The mist didn't harm. It didn't even touch. It simply lingered, waiting. Ron, ever the curious one despite himself, reached out a hand. "Should I?" "Maybe don't touch it," Harry said softly, though not from fear, just an instinct. But Hermione had already stepped closer, eyes wide with understanding. "It's trying to show us something. Look." The mist began to shift, and within it, pictures formed. Not sharp, but soft, like memories viewed through water. The image of a tall figure in old-fashioned wizarding robes, standing alone beneath a starlit sky. An ancient version of the Great Hall, with no ceiling at all, just open air and real stars. And at the center, where the staff table now stood, a stone pedestal with a glowing bowl. "It's a memory," Hermione whispered, "a magical echo." They watched as the figure poured a silver potion into the bowl. The stars overhead shifted in response, aligning perfectly above the liquid, a star map. "Is that some kind of ancient astronomy ritual?" Ron asked, squinting. "Possibly," Hermione said. "It's like the stars and the potion were connected, aligned, maybe. Maybe the Great Hall was once used for more than feasts." The mist began to fade, the images dissolving like fog, touched by morning sun. The spiral of stars overhead pulsed once, softly, then froze in place. and then the room returned to silence. The spell, if it could be called that, had passed. The hum beneath their feet quieted. The magical ceiling remained with its spiral stars frozen above them. But everything else was still. The students, once mesmerized, slowly returned to their conversations. The moment had passed gently, without fanfare. It had left behind no danger, no fear, only questions. Hermione sat back down, fingers still lightly on the table. I don't think that was part of the usual enchantment at all. Harry looked up again at the stars. No, it felt like something was remembering, like the castle itself was showing us a story. But why now? Ron asked. Why not last week or last year? Hermione's voice was quiet. Because it's midnight on the spring solstice. Harry blinked. What? The old magical calendar. Tonight marks the solstice moon, she explained. A rare alignment. In ancient times, wizards believed it was a night when memories could pass between stone and sky. They all went quiet for a moment, letting her words settle. So the castle showed us its memory, Ron asked. Just like that? Hermione nodded. I think the stars vanished earlier, not because they were gone, but because they were preparing, resetting, waiting for the right moment to return in their ancient form. Harry leaned back in his chair, letting his gaze wander back to the spiral above. Whatever it was, it didn't feel threatening, just forgotten. The great hall remained softly lit. Professors and students began to drift out, yawning and stretching, but Harry, Ron, and Hermione lingered a little longer, wrapped in the gentle quiet of something very old, returning to the present, like a memory that finally found someone to remember it. And far above, the spiral stars continued to glow, their pattern unchanging. The following night arrived gently, like a feather floating down through starlit air. The castle breathed in hushes and sighs, its halls dim, torches flickering lazily, and portraits already drifting into their usual slumber. Yet somewhere beneath all that calm, the air stirred with something subtle. Not danger, not urgency, just a ripple. Something that had been waiting, watching. Hermione had spent most of the day combing the library's restricted section, not for anything specific, but for anything that might even whisper of the memory they'd seen in the Great Hall. Star maps, ancient enchantments, references to potion-based rituals, nothing concrete. But one passage had stood out. A barely legible line on a parchment-thin page in a brittle book called Stonebound Secrets of Early Hogwarts. It read, "When the stars return to their spiral, the bowl of reflection stirs again. Only the dungeon remembers the way." Hermione couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't metaphor. The bowl of reflection might be real, and if it was, the key to understanding the magical vision lay somewhere in the castle's lower levels, perhaps even in the potions dungeon. That evening, the trio waited until the castle had yawned and settled. They tiptoed past the sleeping portraits and creaky floorboards, down stairwells that twisted deeper and deeper until the walls grew colder and the air took on the scent of old stone and something faintly metallic, like copper coins, in a locked drawer. The potions classroom was locked, naturally, but Hermione, with quiet confidence, flicked her wand and whispered, Alohomora. The door gave a soft click and opened as if it had been waiting too. Inside, the room was just as they remembered: long tables, dusty cauldrons, shelves of carefully labeled ingredients. But the mood was different tonight. The torches along the wall flickered not with fire, but with a soft, silvery blue glow, and the stone arch over the teaching desk shimmered faintly with runes they'd never noticed before. Harry stepped forward slowly. Those weren't there last week. Because they weren't meant to be seen, Hermione whispered. Not until the stars turned. Ron gave a nervous look around. I still think we should have brought someone with us, like McGonagall, or at least a prefect. But Hermione was already moving toward the back wall, eyes scanning. Look for anything bowl-shaped, anything that doesn't fit the usual dungeon decor. It didn't take long. Behind one of the old storage cabinets, half concealed by cobwebs, was a section of wall that curved inward, unnaturally smooth and round, like it had been polished by hands centuries ago, and resting in a shallow indentation was something remarkable: a stone basin about the size of a large cauldron set directly into the wall. Its edges were engraved with more spiral patterns. It looked like it had always been part of the dungeon, and yet none of them had ever seen it before. The bowl of reflection. Hermione knelt beside it, brushing her fingers lightly across its rim. The stone was cold, but beneath it, a hum, a presence, like the memory from the Great Hall had anchored itself here, deep beneath the castle's heart. And then the bowl stirred. No one had touched it. But as Hermione stepped back, the surface of the basin rippled like water catching the moonlight. Liquid had appeared, silver, luminous, whisper-thin, a mirror and a mist all at once, and within that silvery pool, movement. A scene unfolded, not a memory this time, but something else. A place, a chamber none of them recognized, round stone, surrounded by shelves of ancient glass bottles, each glowing faintly with colored light. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and upon it, a single potion bottle glowing midnight blue. "It's showing us something real," Harry whispered. "Right now, somewhere in the castle." Hermione nodded. "It's guiding us." "But guiding us where?" Ron asked, frowning. "I've never seen that chamber before." The image shimmered. The room in the vision tilted slightly, as if pointing downward. And then, just for a moment, another shape appeared in the reflection. A window with a narrow Gothic arch, framed in stone in the wall of the dungeons. "That window," Hermione said slowly. "There's only one like it down here, the one near the old storage hall, the one Snape always kept shuttered." "Because it's not a real window," Ron said. "I always thought it just showed black stone." "No," Hermione whispered, standing. "It shows the night sky, even when it shouldn't, even when it's raining outside. That's the cursed window." Harry looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly. "You never mentioned it was cursed." "I didn't think it mattered until now," she replied. "But that's where the bowl is pointing." So they followed, through the tunnels beneath the castle, deeper than they'd gone even in their first year, past unused corridors where the walls whispered of secrets too old for names, past doors sealed shut with wax and warnings, until at last they came to it. The window, narrow, tall, framed in blackened stone, and exactly where the vision had shown it. Hermione reached out, and the moment her fingers touched the glass, it shimmered. The stone wall behind them dissolved like mist. And beyond it, a hidden chamber. They stepped through the illusion as if crossing a threshold of dreams. The room beyond was cold, but not lifeless. Potions lined the walls, ancient ones, glowing softly with forgotten magic. The air smelled of mint, cedar, and something warm, like sun on parchment. And in the center, just as the bowl had shown, stood a pedestal. Upon it, a single bottle of deep midnight blue liquid. Hermione approached it slowly, reverently. "There are no labels," Ron said, glancing around. "No instructions." Hermione studied the potion closely. "But look, it's swirling inside, like the stars we saw above the Great Hall. I think this is a memory elixir, but not from a person, from the castle itself." "You mean Hogwarts made this?" Harry asked. "Yes, or maybe it birthed it," she said. "A potion made from layers of the school's oldest memories, a way to pass down what was forgotten." Harry leaned closer, watching the way the potion's light pulsed in the dimness. "Why now?" Hermione whispered. "Because the stars aligned, because the dungeon remembered, and because we were willing to listen." They didn't drink it, not yet. This wasn't the end of the mystery. It was only the next layer. Behind the pedestal, another archway shimmered. Beyond it, more steps, more quiet passages, and the sense that something much older than even Dumbledore's legacy was unfolding. One breath, one night, one glowing ripple at a time. The days that followed drifted by like soft clouds over a still lake. Classes continued, as they always did, transfiguration lessons in sun-dappled rooms, quiet scribbling in the library, warm meals in the great hall. But beneath all of it, beneath the ordinary rhythm of Hogwarts life, something shimmered. A tension so quiet it barely stirred the air, yet it lingered in the back of every breath they took. The trio said nothing to anyone about the hidden room or the midnight blue potion. Not to McGonagall, not to Neville, not even to Luna, who had a knack for sensing when magic shifted beneath the surface. This was something they had to unravel slowly, gently, as though even whispering it too loud might chase it away. That evening, they gathered once more in the room of requirement. This time, the room didn't take the shape of a training hall or a cozy den. Instead, it became something new, an observatory dome. Walls curved up like the inside of a telescope, filled with slow-moving constellations. The air smelled of ink and old maps, and floating candles hovered above them, shedding pale, starlit glows. They placed the potion at the center of a round table conjured by the room. It pulsed faintly, as if acknowledging it was being seen again. Hermione opened a fresh journal and dipped her quill. "We'll record everything, even the quiet parts." Ron gave a soft sigh. "I miss when the biggest mystery was where the socks disappeared in the laundry." Harry chuckled, but even as he smiled, his eyes stayed on the bottle. They didn't open it, not yet. Instead, they studied it for hours, watching how it shifted when the stars moved across the enchanted ceiling, noticing how the liquid inside responded faintly to proximity, glowing slightly warmer when they neared, dimming when they stepped back. And occasionally, a thread of silver would drift within the blue, like a wisp of memory reaching for the surface. Hermione finally murmured, "It's trying to speak." "Speak," Ron said, blinking. "Like a message?" "No," Harry said softly, "more like a story, a silent one." That night, Hermione returned to the library. She pored over volumes on sentient magic, on spells that could remember, on places that absorbed feeling. In one weathered tome titled Echoes of Magic, When Places Remember, she found a curious passage. Some potions brewed in silence and bound to place take on memory, not from ingredients, but from witnessing. They do not speak in words. They stir when the story must rise again. It gave her chills. The midnight blue potion was not made by someone. It was born from Hogwarts itself. It had been collecting for centuries, perhaps longer, gathering fragments, watching, waiting, and now, for some reason, it had chosen to awaken. Later that evening, they returned to the hidden room behind the cursed window. This time, they noticed something new. The potion pedestal was no longer the only thing present. Along the far wall, a soft line of runes had emerged, spiraling gently upward in an arc. The room had grown, or changed, or remembered more. Hermione translated slowly, murmuring the ancient tongue aloud. To follow the silence is to step into the truth. The room does not open to sight, but to stillness. "So we're supposed to be quiet?" Ron whispered. But as they stood in silence, something shifted. The room rippled, not with sound, not with wind, but with memory. In the hush, they began to see shapes, faint outlines forming in the corners of the room. A desk, a quill, a parchment, a pair of hands rigging. They weren't in the room anymore, or rather, the room had slipped into a different version of itself, a memory. Not like a pensieve. They hadn't fallen into the scene. Instead, the scene unfurled around them, like mist weaving through moonlight. They watched as the hands wrote, slow, careful letters on thick parchment. The writer's robes were unfamiliar, old, dusty. Perhaps a student from long ago, perhaps a professor. The figure never turned, never spoke, just wrote and paused and listened, as though taking dictation from silence itself. The trio stood still, not daring to move. Then, just as softly, the memory receded, and in its place, another rune appeared on the wall. Hermione read it aloud. "If you return with intention, the path opens wider." Ron frowned. Return with intention? We had intention. Hermione shook her head gently. No, we had curiosity. There's a difference. Over the next several days, they prepared. They studied not only the potion, but the room itself, how it shifted with their thoughts, how it seemed to reveal more, the calmer they were, how it responded not to questions shouted, but to truths felt. It was during one of these quiet visits that the second magical twist occurred. Harry noticed it first. A soft shimmer behind the pedestal, a glint of gold. He approached slowly, brushing away a layer of invisible dust with his hand. A plaque revealed itself, no bigger than a book cover, but etched with elegant ancient script. Hermione translated quickly, eyes wide as the meaning came through. Here lies the echoing phial, vessel of that which the castle does not speak aloud. Those who listen may find not answers, but alignment. Ron stared. What does that mean? Hermione stepped back, breath catching. I think this potion doesn't give answers. It helps you ask the right questions. As they stood in stunned silence, the potion began to swirl, but this time not randomly. This time, an image appeared on the surface. Not a memory, not a place. A person, an unfamiliar figure standing at the edge of a cliff beneath a thunderous sky, cloaked, hooded, and watching something below, a great castle in the rain, burning with soft candlelight. Hogwarts, but not in the present, not in the past either, somewhere in between, a memory that hadn't happened yet, or had been hidden. The image flickered, the potion stilled. What was that? Ron asked, voice low. Hermione whispered, a memory, yet to be remembered. It was then they understood. The midnight potion was not passive. It was guiding them, gently, quietly, toward a mystery buried in the deepest layers of the castle's heart. A secret too heavy for time, too soft for records, a truth that lived not in words, but in presence. They didn't need to solve it all that night. This wasn't that kind of mystery. This was a story that would take nights, and calm, and trust. And so, for the first time in their adventures, they chose patience. They placed the potion back on its pedestal, bowed their heads, and whispered, nothing. For in Hogwarts, sometimes the silence answers back. As the days passed, Hogwarts settled into its usual rhythms, floating candles in the great hall, laughter echoing from the courtyards, parchment rustling in quiet classrooms. Yet beneath this familiar calm, a quieter journey continued, known only to 3 students who now carried a secret too soft for daylight. The midnight blue potion remained untouched on its pedestal behind the enchanted window, but its presence lingered, like the echo of a forgotten song. Each evening, Harry, Ron, and Hermione returned, not with urgency, but with a kind of reverence. They weren't trying to unravel a mystery anymore. They were inviting it to show itself. And Hogwarts, ancient and wise, began to respond. One evening, as rain whispered against the high windows of the library, Hermione arrived first. Her arms were full of scrolls, some so old they barely held together. She set them gently on a table, tucked away in a candlelit corner where the flickering flame made the ink dance. She had been studying magical resonance, the way enchanted objects held feelings, stories, even choices. The more she read, the more it became clear. This potion was not simply remembering something, it was waiting for them to be ready to remember too. Moments later, Harry arrived, carrying a weathered book of wand lore. I keep thinking, he said softly, what if this potion didn't form on accident? What if something or someone long ago asked it to witness something, to keep it safe until the right people came? Ron entered last, with nothing in his hands but a warm chocolate muffin from the kitchens. He took one look at their books and sighed. I brought snacks. That counts as contribution, right? Hermione smiled despite herself. More than you think. Sometimes a quiet room, a bit of warmth, and good company is exactly what magic needs to awaken. And so they began their exploration, not just of the dungeon room, but of themselves. Harry, always drawn to movement and instinct, began to study the shifting images in the potion more carefully. Sometimes it shimmered with skies that didn't belong to this time. Other times, it showed hands, always writing, always silent. And once, just once, it showed a corridor in Hogwarts that none of them recognized, narrow, windowless, with greenish torchlight and a strange door made of sleepwalking stone. Ron, hesitant at first, started keeping a journal. It was messy, filled with half-thoughts, drawings, snack wrappers, but it became something surprising. The potion pulsed more brightly when he brought it near, as if it recognized the honesty in those pages. And Hermione, of course, became the quiet cartographer of it all, mapping the room's growth, translating every rune that appeared, noticing how the potion if they entered happy or quiet or worried. It wasn't reacting to events, it was reacting to feeling. It became clear that the potion and the room were guiding them through themselves. And then something unusual happened on a cool Wednesday evening. As twilight curled around the towers of the castle, the room of requirement called to them instead of them seeking it. They felt it, a soft pull, a thread of warmth that guided their steps down corridors they knew and yet didn't know. It led them not to the hidden window, but to a different version of the room. This time, it looked like a small observatory again, round, quiet, filled with parchment maps of stars that had never existed. In the center sat the potion, waiting, but beside it, for the first time, were 3 identical flasks, empty, clear, and marked with a symbol, a spiral. "What does it mean?" Ron asked. Hermione traced the symbol lightly. "It's a rune of reflection, of turning inward." Harry looked between the potion and the flasks. "It wants us to take part in it." They stared for a long moment. "Not drink it," Hermione added gently. "Just accept it. Share something in return. I think this potion was created from a feeling, and it wants us to give something back, to trust it." Trust. That was the quiet request. They each stood silently for several moments before stepping forward. Harry placed a memory into the flask, not through magic, but through presence. He closed his eyes and thought of the first time he truly felt home at Hogwarts, the warm light of the Gryffindor common room, Ron's laughter, Hermione's quiet reading, the sense of belonging. The flask glowed faintly and sealed. Ron, a bit nervous, placed in a feeling too, the time he had felt small in the shadow of others, yet brave enough to stand anyway. His moment during the chess game in first year, when bravery wasn't loud, it was necessary. His flask shimmered too. Hermione, her voice barely above a whisper, offered the memory of the night she had once cried in the bathroom, alone, before anyone really knew her, and the way it felt when someone, 2 someones, had come back for her. Friendship, when it felt like magic. Her flask sealed last. The potion pulsed, not brighter, not louder, but deeper. It had received them, and the room responded, A single new rune appeared, floating in the air like a snowflake made of light. When the heart meets the past, the door will open, Hermione translated. They weren't being asked to solve anything anymore. They were being asked to feel. The rest of the evening passed in peaceful stillness. No mysteries to chase, no threats, only quiet exploration and choices made in trust. Later that night, as they walked slowly back to Gryffindor Tower, the torches along the hall flickered in a rhythm they hadn't noticed before, as if the castle itself had exhaled. Harry paused at a window that looked out across the lake. "Do you think this is what Dumbledore meant?" he asked softly. "That sometimes the answers are in how we choose, not what we choose?" Hermione nodded slowly. Maybe the real magic is in being willing to listen at all. And Ron, ever the steady heart of the group, simply said, "Then let's keep listening." They walked on, their footsteps light, not because they were free from questions, but because for once they weren't afraid of not knowing. They were learning to listen. And in Hogwarts, that's where the true adventure always begins. The corridors of Hogwarts had always whispered, but now those whispers seemed to shape themselves into meaning. As the trio continued their quiet visits to the Room of Requirement, each evening felt more like an invitation. The dungeon room didn't just appear, it welcomed them. Its magic softened, like old parchment warmed by firelight. Something inside the room had changed, and deep down, they all sensed it. The moment of truth was drawing near. The potion, which once shimmered like a dream caught in glass, now seemed more grounded, more present. It no longer danced with shifting images, but held a single vision within its depths, clear, unwavering, and waiting. Hermione was the first to notice the stillness. "It stopped showing new memories," she said one evening, her voice barely above a hush. "I think it's ready to speak." Harry leaned closer to the potion's surface, watching the image frozen beneath. It showed a young girl in Hogwarts robes, her back turned to them. Her hair was long, and her shoulders slightly hunched, as if she carried a secret too heavy to share. Behind her stood the enchanted window, framed in misty silver, and the same potion glowed beside her, untouched. Ron furrowed his brow. "She looks familiar somehow, but not from our time." Hermione nodded. "She's from the past, and I think this is her memory." Then, something stirred, not in the potion, but in the room itself. The stone wall behind the window trembled slightly. A seam appeared in the rock that hadn't been there before. A thin line, like a door waiting to be opened, but only when the moment was right. Harry took a deep breath, stepped forward, and touched the edge of the stone. There was no resistance. The wall melted away, not loudly, but like a curtain of mist parting, and behind it lay a small chamber, no larger than a cupboard. At its center, on a low pedestal, sat a journal bound in dusky leather, edged in gold thread, untouched by time. Hermione's breath caught. "It's hers." Harry opened the journal carefully, and the first page shimmered with magical ink that appeared only when the reader was ready. "I am Alara," it read, "and this is the truth I couldn't carry alone." The next pages told a story that gently unraveled a long-forgotten sorrow. Alara had been a quiet, gifted Ravenclaw student nearly 2 centuries ago. She was brilliant with enchantments and deeply curious about memory magic. But she was also lonely, deeply so. In a time when secrets were dangerous and quaint students were easily overlooked, Alara discovered something beneath the castle, a pocket of living magic hidden in the stones. A place where memories could be poured into potions, sealed in time and kept safe. She believed that feelings, especially unspoken ones, had weight, and that the castle itself could hold them. So she created a ritual, one that could capture a memory without speaking it aloud, a way to be seen even when no one was looking. But something went wrong. One night, she poured a memory into the potion, one filled with grief and longing and a desperate desire to be understood. But it was too powerful. The potion became unstable, and the enchanted window that housed it became sealed, locked by magic that even Alara couldn't reverse. She vanished shortly after, not from harm, but by choice. Alara left Hogwarts, heartbroken that her magic had failed. She hoped that someday someone would find the potion, listen to it, and finish the story. And now they had. The final pages of the journal didn't end with instructions or spells. They ended with a single question: will you remember me? Hermione gently closed the book. Her hands trembled slightly. She wasn't trying to trap magic, she whispered. She was trying to share something too heavy to carry alone. Harry stared at the potion. She made a memory that waited for someone to be ready to feel it. Ron nodded slowly. And now that we have, maybe the magic doesn't need to be locked away anymore. As if in response, the potion shimmered once more, not with visions, but with light, soft, golden, warm. It began to lift, like fog rising from a lake at dawn. The room glowed with it. The enchanted window, which had remained unchanged for so long, began to fade, and then it vanished, not with a bang or burst, but with peace. The potion was gone. The window, too. All that remained was the feeling it left behind, a hush, a warmth, a soft echo in their chests that whispered, "You were seen, you were enough." They stood in silence for a long time, bathed in the golden afterglow of a mystery not solved, but understood. Hermione finally broke the silence. Alara's magic worked, not because we followed a spell, but because we listened. We felt it, and we answered. Harry smiled faintly. She wasn't forgotten, and Ron added, "She's part of the castle now, just like us." They left the room of requirement without words, walking slowly through the quiet corridors. The torches flickered gently, as if humming an old lullaby. Hogwarts felt warmer, lighter, as though a deep breath had been released. In Gryffindor Tower, as they settled by the fire, Hermione opened her own journal, not to study, but to write a letter, not one that would be sent, but one that would be kept. A letter to Alara. Harry leaned back in his chair, gazing into the fire. You know, maybe there are more potions like hers, more quiet magic, waiting to be remembered. Ron nodded. Then I guess we keep exploring, not to find answers, but to keep listening. Outside, the wind curled around the turrets of the castle, But inside, everything was still. The mystery had passed, but the memory remained. After the final shimmer of light faded from the room of requirement, a gentle stillness seemed to pedal across the castle. It wasn't just quiet, it was peaceful, the kind of peace that wraps itself around the heart like a blanket after a long, chilly evening. For Harry, Ron, and Hermione, the mystery of the dungeon potion had left behind something far deeper than answers. It had left behind a feeling of closeness, of compassion, and of connection to someone who had lived and breathed within the very same stone walls centuries before. Alara's story had not ended in sorrow. It had ended in remembrance. And in the quiet days that followed, the trio found themselves moving more slowly through Hogwarts, their steps softened, their eyes more thoughtful. There was no urgency now, just appreciation, reflection. Hermione found herself lingering longer in the library, not buried in research, but sitting quietly with a book on her lap, the candlelight glowing beside her. Sometimes she didn't read at all. She simply looked out the tall windows and wondered about the other students, long gone, whose stories were still hidden in the walls. What other quiet magic had been left behind, just waiting to be heard? Ron, surprisingly, began spending his evenings walking the corridors alone. Not far, just quiet strolls between dinner and bedtime. He said he wanted to keep the castle company. At first, Harry and Hermione teased him for it, but over time they realized Ron had grown quieter in the best way, more observant, more present. The corridors were no longer just hallways, they were paths to reflection. And Harry, he returned to the dungeons, not for another mystery, but simply to sit. Just once more, the room of requirement appeared, though it no longer showed him the potion, or Alara, or the enchanted window. This time, it gave him a chair, a small table, and a single flickering lantern. And he sat there quietly for a while, listening to nothing in particular, just the breathing silence of the old castle, still and alive. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Alara." Outside, autumn deepened. The trees in the forbidden forest blushed with gold and crimson. The air grew crisper, and with the change in season came a gentle shift inside the trio as well. Life returned to normal, but a softer kind of normal, one touched by wonder. They never spoke of the potion to anyone else, not because it needed to stay a secret, but because it felt like a gift, something intimate and sacred, not meant to be told in casual conversation. It was a memory, now carried together, quietly. One evening, as they sat together in the Gryffindor common room with tea and toast and the gentle crackling of fire beside them, Hermione spoke softly. "Do you think the castle has more stories like hers? Hidden, waiting." Harry smiled without looking up. "I hope so." Ron stretched, yawning. "I don't mind a few more mysteries, as long as they don't keep us up too late." They all chuckled. The clock ticked, the flames flickered, Crookshanks curled lazily near the hearth, and in the hush of that moment, the magic of Hogwarts didn't feel grand or dangerous. It felt warm, familiar, like home. Outside the tower windows, stars began to blink into view. The night sky, painted in velvet blue, watched over the ancient castle as it always had, and somewhere, deep in the foundation stones, the memory of Alara rested, not forgotten, not trapped, but cherished, because someone had listened, because someone had remembered. And in the quiet calm of that evening, as sleepiness crept gently through their limbs, the trio understood something simple and beautiful. Sometimes the most powerful magic is the one that brings no explosion, no light, no noise. Sometimes it's the magic of feeling seen and being still. The castle of Hogwarts stood bathed in moonlight once again, its spires silvered under the sky's gentle gaze. Inside, behind the heavy stone walls and warm wooden panels, all was calm. The last flickers of candlelight danced quietly in the hallways, and the portraits had begun to doze in their frames. In the Gryffindor common room, the fire had dimmed to a low orange glow. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had already gone to bed. Their tea mugs sat empty on the table, the soft hum of the magical warmth spell still keeping the air cozy around them. Crookshanks was curled up on a crimson armchair, his breath slow and deep, lost in dreams of warm sunbeams and floating feathers. And above, the sky shimmered with stars once more. Whatever had caused their disappearance on that strange, enchanted night had passed. Or perhaps it had simply fulfilled its purpose. The stars had returned not just to the sky, but to the hearts of those who had followed their fading light. Tonight, all of Hogwarts rested easy. The mystery was no longer something to solve, but something to remember. A story folded gently into the larger, endless tapestry of this magical place. Another quiet chapter, whispered through stone and shadow, candlelight and dreams. And as you, dear listener, drift gently toward sleep, perhaps you too can feel the magic softly wrapping around you. The kind of magic that doesn't shout or spark, but instead hums quietly beneath everything. The kind that waits patiently to be discovered. Let the softness of the night hold you now, as the castle settles and the stars resume their watch. Let your thoughts float gently, like snowflakes on the wind, or parchment pages turning on their own. Because in the world of magic, even the quietest moments hold stories. And in those stories, you are never alone. Sleep well now, and remember, sometimes even a single potion stirred at midnight can open the door to something quietly wonderful. Good night, sleepy fellow, and may your dreams be filled with lantern light, soft stars, and the whispers of Hogwarts walls.